Revenge with Iris. Every story, like and subscribe for more.
You ever notice the sound a machine makes right before something inside it decides it's had enough? Not the crash, not the sparks, the moment just before all that. It's quieter than people expect. A low, uneven rhythm in the motor. A tiny shiver in the frame. Like the machine is clearing its throat before screaming. Most people hear background noise. Clara Hayes heard a warning. She was 58 years old and had spent 32 of those years inside Ironvale Industries, a stamping plant big enough to feel like its own small city. The place had a permanent smell. Hot steel, burnt hydraulic oil, and the faint electrical bite of welding arcs. You couldn't wash that smell out of your clothes. Not really. Clara's spine had a slight curve from decades of leaning over control cabinets and relay boards. Her hands carried the small scars and calluses that come from tools slipping and machinery refusing to be polite. But what she really carried was something companies love to praise. Right before they decide it's too expensive to keep. Experience no manual can replace. It was a Tuesday morning. Inside a factory, Tuesdays feel exactly like Mondays. Same noise, same pressure, same production targets breathing down everyone's neck. Clara was standing beside Station 4 on Line 3. Line 3 had been her responsibility for almost 20 years. A robotic stamping and transfer system installed sometime in the early 2000s. Cutting edge back then, stubborn and temperamental now. Over time it had developed personality. If humidity dropped too low, the alignment sensors drifted. The feed arms hesitated half a second before each cycle. Clara didn't need a diagnostic screen to notice. She could feel it through the concrete floor. That morning the vibration had shifted slightly. Not enough for the system logs to flag it yet, but enough for her to know something was off. She crouched beside the safety cage and adjusted the sensor mount. One careful movement. A quarter turn with her wrench. Any tighter and the optical reader would start throwing false errors every 10 minutes. She had just finished when she sensed someone standing behind her. Not a technician. Technicians walked heavy, steel-toe boots, steady steps. This was different. Like, quick, expensive. Clara didn't bother turning around. "You're standing in the yellow safety zone," she said calmly. "If you're not cleared for high-voltage maintenance, you're about 3 inches away from a very bad insurance report." A voice answered. "Clara Hayes." She stood and turned. The man behind her looked like he had been printed directly out of a corporate brochure. Perfect hair. Perfect suit. Tablet tucked neatly under one arm. Derek Vaughan, the plant's brand new director of modernization. He gave her a polite smile while looking at her grease-stained coveralls like someone noticing mud on a marble floor. "I've been reviewing plant performance," he said. Clara wiped her hands on a rag that had probably been in service longer than his career. "Let me guess," she replied. "Corporate sent you to explain how everything we've been doing for 30 years is wrong." Derek chuckled softly. "Not wrong," he said. "Inefficient." Behind them, Line 3 continued its steady rhythm, metal sheets sliding into robotic arms with mechanical precision. Clara listened to the machines for a moment. Then she looked back at him. And somewhere deep in her gut, she felt the same quiet tension you get when dark clouds begin rolling across open water. Storm was coming. The problem was, the man standing in front of her had no idea how dangerous a factory becomes when someone starts fixing things that were never broken. You can learn a lot about a disaster by watching the moment right before it starts. The warning signs are always there. The problem is, the wrong people are usually the ones making the decisions. And on that Tuesday morning at Ironvale Industries, the wrong man was holding the steering wheel. 20 minutes after their little conversation on the factory floor, Clara walked into the main conference room. The temperature inside was freezing. Corporate liked their meetings cold. Something about keeping people alert. Clara always thought it felt more like a hospital waiting room. Inside were the usual faces from the old guard. Miguel Alvarez from maintenance, arms crossed and grease still under his fingernails. Sarah Coleman from quality control, flipping through a clipboard she already knew by heart. And Big Dave, the floor foreman, who looked like a man who'd already seen too many efficiency initiatives come and go. They all looked tired. Not sleepy. Just tired in the way factory veterans get when they feel a storm coming but can't stop it. At the front of the room stood Derek Vaughan. Behind him glowed a PowerPoint presentation filled with corporate buzzwords. Optimization, digital transformation, operational synergy. Clara took a seat without saying anything. Derek started pacing slowly, tablet in hand. "I've spent the last 2 weeks observing this facility," he began, smiling confidently. "And I have to say, I'm surprised." No one spoke. "I'm surprised by how dependent this plant is on what I'd call tribal knowledge." He said the phrase like it was something unpleasant. Too many systems rely on individuals rather than standardized processes. His eyes slid toward Clara. If Clara here were to retire tomorrow, Line 3 would collapse. The room went quiet. Miguel leaned forward. "With respect," he said carefully, "those machines are 20 years old. The manuals don't cover half the issues we deal with." Derek waved a dismissive hand. "That's exactly the mindset we're changing." He tapped the screen behind him. A diagram appeared showing a cloud-based control system replacing the factory's local servers. "Starting immediately," Derek said proudly, "we're migrating operations to a fully digitized ERP platform. No more manual patches. No more custom workarounds. Everything's standardized." Clara felt her fingers tighten under the table. She already knew where this was going. Derek finally turned fully toward her. "Which brings us to staffing." There it was. "Clara Hayes," he continued casually, "your current role focuses heavily on maintaining legacy infrastructure. And since we're eliminating that infrastructure..." He paused. "HR will be scheduling a meeting with you later today to discuss your transition." The word hung in the air. Clara didn't react. Didn't argue. Didn't even blink. "Understood," she said calmly. Derek smiled. "Great. Out with the old, in with the new." Meeting adjourned. As everyone filed out, Miguel stopped beside her. "This is garbage," he muttered quietly. "You're the reason half these machines still run." Clara stood up slowly. Her face remained calm, but a very small smile appeared. "Maybe Derek's right," she said. Miguel frowned. "What do you mean?" Clara picked up her notebook and walked toward the door. "He wants to see how the factory runs without tribal knowledge." She glanced back at the conference room. "I think we should let him." Back in the engineering bay, Clara sat down at her workstation. Stacks of old schematics surrounded the desk. Coffee mugs from a dozen different years. And a terminal screen she had used almost every day for 3 decades. Derek thought he was firing an employee. What he didn't realize was that he had just removed the only person who knew how the entire factory actually worked. Clara opened a console window. Her fingers moved across the keyboard automatically, copying files, encrypting backups, saving something most people in the building didn't even know existed. The full logic architecture of Iron Veil's production systems. Every patch, every workaround, every safety layer. 30 years of knowledge. She leaned back in her chair, and for the first time since the meeting, she reached into her locker. Behind a stack of old manuals sat a small USB drive. Clara picked it up. It felt heavier than it should have, like holding the key to something dangerous. She slipped it into her pocket. Then she looked out across the factory floor. The machines were still humming, still working, still trusting the systems keeping them alive. "They think I'm obsolete," she whispered quietly. Her eyes hardened. "They're about to find out how wrong that is." If you enjoy stories where arrogant bosses learn expensive lessons, hit subscribe and drop a like. It really helps the channel keep these revenge stories coming. Trust me. Because the real chaos at Iron Veil hasn't even started yet. And when the machines begin failing tomorrow morning, Derek Vaughan is going to wish he had never fired Clara Hayes. Sometimes revenge doesn't start with anger. Sometimes it starts with silence. Quiet kind. The kind that happens when someone pushes you too far. and doesn't realize they just made the worst mistake of their career. And at Iron Veil Industries, Derek Vaughan had just done exactly that. The HR office smelled like artificial vanilla. Clara had always hated that smell. It was the kind companies used when they were about to fire someone. Like air freshener could somehow mask the scent of broken careers. The office sat inside the administrative wing of the plant. Clean carpets, beige walls, soft lighting. A completely different world from the factory floor where sparks flew and machines roared. Clara sat in a stiff chair that was clearly designed to make people uncomfortable. Across from her sat Derek Vaughan. Next to him was Lena Carter from HR. A young woman who looked like she'd rather be anywhere else. Derek leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled together like a CEO in a business school case study. "So, Clara," he began smoothly. "As I mentioned earlier, the shift toward Industry 4.0 means certain legacy positions are no longer required." He smiled politely. "It's not personal. It's evolution." Clara watched him quietly. He continued. "Your skill set is impressive but outdated. You're like a carburetor in a world of fuel injection." He clearly expected the metaphor to impress her. Clara simply nodded. 32 years of keeping this plant running at 99% uptime, she said calmly. "And that's a carburetor." Derek pointed at her. "Exactly. You get it." He looked pleased with himself. Lena slid a document across the desk. "This is the separation agreement," she said gently. "It includes severance compensation based on your tenure." Clara glanced at the numbers. It was insulting. Enough money to buy a used car. Maybe. Nowhere near enough to compensate for 3 decades spent walking concrete floors and keeping aging machinery alive. "And the handover?" Clara asked. Derek smirked. "You won't need to train anyone. We already have full documentation." He leaned forward slightly. "The new engineering team starts Monday. They're certified in the new ERP control system. No duct tape fixes. No manual overrides. No improvisation." Clara studied his face for a moment. Then Derek stood up and walked to a shredder sitting in the corner. He picked up a folder. "Actually," he said casually, holding it up, "this was your contract renewal proposal." Clara recognized the folder instantly. 3 more years of work. Healthcare coverage. Retirement stability. Derek smiled. "Digitization makes things cleaner." He fed the folder into the shredder. The machine chewed through the paper with a loud mechanical crunch. Tiny strips of Clara's future fell into the bin. If Derek had shown even a little respect, if he had asked for help, Clara might have warned him. She might have told him about the fragile timing system on line 2. Or the cooling pumps that needed manual resets after storms. Or the hidden safety routines buried deep inside the factory software. But as the shredder finished its work, something inside Clara shut off. "Okay," she said. She signed the agreement. Didn't read the fine print. She didn't care. "Badge, please," Lena said quietly. Clara unclipped her ID badge. The photo was from 20 years ago. She looked younger there, less tired. She placed it on the desk. "Any company property?" Derek added. Clara opened her bag. She placed her company phone on the desk. Then her heavy ring of factory keys. Server rooms. Electrical cages. Maintenance lifts. All of it. "That's everything," she said. The USB drive in her pocket felt warm against her leg. "Excellent," Derek said. "Security will escort you out. Standard procedure." Clara stood slowly. Her knees cracked slightly. 30 years of concrete floors had done their work. She looked Derek directly in the eye. "Good luck with your modernization." Derek scoffed. "Machines are machines, Clara. They do what they're programmed to do." Clara gave a small nod. "Yes," she said softly. "They certainly do." The walk through the factory floor was quiet. A young security guard named Kevin walked beside her. He looked miserable. "I'm sorry about this," he muttered. Clara shrugged. "It's business." Kevin glanced toward the massive production lines. Who's gonna fix the breakers when they trip in the cafeteria? Clara slid on her sunglasses. I'm sure Derek will optimize the breaker. Kevin chuckled weakly. They reached the parking lot. Clara's old pickup truck sat waiting. Rust along the doors. Paint faded from years of Michigan winters. She placed her small box of belongings in the passenger seat and sat down behind the wheel. For a moment she just looked at the factory. The massive concrete building. Smoke drifting from the stacks. The distant hum of production vibrating through the asphalt. Then she pulled out her personal phone. Not the company one. A different one. She opened a secure diagnostic app. Years ago, during an emergency maintenance project, she had created a remote access node tied to the plant's lighting control system. The IT department never noticed. Why would they? They searched for users, not ghosts. On the screen appeared a login prompt. User. Admin and ghost. Clara typed the password. The system opened instantly. Access level, root. The factory network was still connected. Still alive. Still trusting her. Clara didn't change anything. Not yet. Revenge in industrial systems required patience. But she made sure the door was still open. System status. Online. Clara locked the phone and placed it on the dashboard. Then she started the truck. The engine roared to life. As she pulled out of the parking lot, she didn't look in the rearview mirror. Instead she whispered quietly, "Goodbye, Iron Veil." Then she added one more sentence. "I'll wait for the phone call." Sometimes machines fail slowly. A warning light. A strange vibration. A sound that doesn't belong. But sometimes, the collapse happens all at once. And when it does, the people who thought they were in control are usually the first ones to panic. At Iron Veil Industries, Derek Vaughn was about to experience that panic firsthand. Monday morning, the factory floor buzzed with a different kind of energy. New engineers walked around carrying tablets, bright safety vests, fresh certifications, and a quiet confidence that came from believing they understood everything. Above them, giant digital screens displayed the new system's pride and joy. Iron Veil Cloud Control Platform, live. Derek stood on a small stage set up near the main assembly line. A few department heads gathered around. Some workers watched while pretending not to. Today, Derek announced proudly, Iron Veil takes its first real step into the future. He gestured toward the massive monitors. Full automation. Predictive diagnostics. AI-driven production efficiency. Polite applause followed. Derek smiled. This plant will now run smarter, faster, and cleaner than ever before. One of the younger engineers, Jason Patel, stepped forward holding a tablet. "Sir, the integration with the new ERP system is complete. Line 1 and Line 2 are fully synchronized. Energy management protocols are active." Derek nodded with satisfaction. "Excellent. Let's begin." Jason tapped the screen. Across the factory, machines began shifting into the new automated sequence. Conveyor belts accelerated slightly. Robotic arms adjusted timing. Cooling systems recalibrated. For the first 30 minutes, everything looked perfect. Derek watched the dashboards like a proud architect admiring his building. "See," he said to the operations manager. "No duct tape. No manual overrides. Just clean data." The manager forced a smile. Then the first warning appeared. A small yellow icon flashed on Jason's tablet. "Ah, sir," he said. Derek didn't even turn. "What is it?" "Cooling pump response delay on line 2. Derek waved a hand dismissively. "Temporary latency. The cloud system reroutes automatically." Jason nodded slowly. "Right, of course." The system recalculated. But deep inside the factory's mechanical guts, a pump that had always required a manual reset after power fluctuations remained inactive. Clara had known that. Everyone who worked the floor knew that. But the documentation Derek trusted didn't mention it. 5 minutes later another warning appeared. this time read. Pressure variance. Line 2. Jason frowned. That's odd. The operations manager stepped closer. Pressure sensors never trip on that line. Jason tapped rapidly on his tablet. The system says the cooling loop isn't responding. Derek finally turned. Then reset it. Jason blinked. It doesn't have a remote reset. The manager spoke quietly. You have to physically cycle the breaker. Maintenance used to do it. Derek frowned. Then send maintenance. The manager hesitated. Maintenance supervisor was Clara. For the first time that morning, Derek's confidence flickered. Then send someone else. Down on the factory floor, a junior technician opened the electrical cabinet. Rows of labeled switches filled the panel. But none of the labels matched the digital diagrams. He spoke into his radio. Control, which breaker is the pump reset? Silence. Jason scanned the system. There's no listing for it. The technician wiped sweat from his forehead. Pressure is climbing. Back in the control area, alarms started multiplying. Line 2 coolant temp rising. Pressure limit approaching. System response delay. Jason's fingers flew across the tablet. The AI keeps trying to compensate. It's increasing pump speed, but the pump isn't even running. The operations manager's face turned pale. That's going to overpressurize the chamber. Derek snapped. Shut down the line then. Jason froze. It's not responding to shutdown commands. What do you mean not responding? The control loop is stuck. A loud metallic bang echoed across the factory floor. Workers turned instantly. Steam burst from a safety valve near line 2. Alarms exploded across every screen. Red lights flashed everywhere. The entire line shuddered to a halt. Production conveyors jammed. Robotic arms froze mid-motion. Then, the factory went eerily quiet. Inside Derek's office, the phone rang. It was the plant director. What the hell just happened? Derek wiped sweat from his forehead. A temporary systems issue. How long to fix it? Derek looked at Jason. Jason looked at the screens. The screens looked worse every second. Finally Jason whispered something. Sir. What? Jason swallowed. The control architecture is locked in a loop. The old manual bypass routines are missing. Derek stared at him. What bypass routines? Jason hesitated. The ones Clara used. Silence filled the room. The plant director spoke slowly. So the system can't restart. Jason shook his head. Not without someone who understands the legacy control logic. The director's voice turned cold. Then call her. Derek didn't answer immediately. Instead he stared at the frozen factory floor through the glass window. $30 million in equipment. Hundreds of workers waiting. Production completely dead. And suddenly, he understood something. Machines might follow code. But factories follow people. And the one person who understood this place was already gone. Across town, Clara's phone vibrated quietly on her kitchen table. She looked at the screen. Ironvale Industries. Incoming call. Clara smiled slightly. She didn't answer. Not yet. If you've made it this far, make sure you subscribe to the channel. Because in the final part, Derek will drive across the city to beg Clara for help. But what he doesn't know is this. Clara isn't interested in fixing the factory anymore. She's interested in buying it. And the deal she's about to make will change everything. Ever heard what silence costs a company? Not the peaceful kind. The kind that happens when every machine in a factory suddenly stops. No presses. No conveyor belts. No robotic arms. Just hundreds of workers standing in confused silence. While millions of dollars bleed out every minute. That silence arrived at Ironvale Industries exactly 3 days after Clara Hayes walked out the door. And the man responsible for creating it had no idea what he had broken. The first failure looked small. A single sensor on line 3 started rejecting panels. Red warning lights blinked across the console. The machine stopped. Operators tried restarting it. Error code. They tried resetting the optical reader. Another error. Maintenance opened the cabinet. Everything looked normal. But the system refused to calibrate. Then line 2 slowed down. Then line 4 halted completely. Within 30 minutes, the entire stamping floor had turned into a museum of silent machines. Production managers rushed between control panels. Supervisors yelled instructions. Technicians rebooted systems. Nothing worked. Because the problem wasn't mechanical. It was something much worse. A system that had been perfectly balanced for decades had just lost the one person who knew how to keep it breathing. Inside the control room, Derek Vaughan stared at a wall of flashing alarms. "Why are they all failing at once?" he demanded. An engineer hesitated before answering. "Because the systems were manually tuned." Derek frowned. "Then retune them." The engineer looked uncomfortable. "That's the problem. No one documented the adjustments." The room went quiet. Then someone finally said the sentence nobody wanted to admit. Clara Hayes handled that. By the second day, production losses had crossed $3 million. Emergency consultants were flown in. Corporate engineers arrived with laptops and diagnostics equipment. They studied system logs for hours. But the machines behaved like stubborn animals. Every automated recalibration failed. Every restart produced new faults. Because something simple had disappeared. Not code. Not hardware. Experience. Late that night, one of the senior engineers finally found something strange. A maintenance drive connected to the diagnostic server. Inside it was a single video file. The label read, "For Ironvale, since you think I'm replaceable." The room froze. They pressed play. Clara appeared on the screen, sitting calmly inside the empty factory. Behind her, line 3 hummed quietly. She looked tired. But her voice was steady. "Hello, Derek," she said. "If you're watching this, the machines probably stopped listening to you." A few engineers exchanged uncomfortable looks. Clara continued. "For 30 years I adjusted these lines by hand. Tiny things. Sensor spacing. Timing delays. Hydraulic pressure balance." She held up a small wrench. "Stuff no consultant will ever notice." She leaned slightly closer to the camera. "You fired the only person who knew how to keep the rhythm." Behind her, a robotic arm placed another steel panel perfectly into position. Still working. Still balanced. "For the record," Clara said calmly, "I didn't sabotage anything. I simply stopped fixing the things you never knew were broken." He paused. Then added one final line. "The machines were always talking. You just fired the only person who knew how to listen." The video ended. 3 weeks later, Ironvale quietly rehired Clara Hayes. But not as a technician. As a consultant. At 5 times her previous salary. And Derek Vaughan. He lasted exactly 2 more months before corporate decided modernization needed a different director. So remember something. Machines break. Systems fail. Companies collapse. But the most expensive mistake a corporation can make is believing that experience is replaceable. If you enjoy stories where quiet people win in the end, make sure to subscribe to the channel. Because sometimes the loudest revenge